I was born into a village that counted its seasons by pain. The northern winters didn't simply arrive day-hunted. They pressed against the shutters, crawled under boots, and made even breathing feel like a bargain. When the snow began to fall too early and the river froze in places it never should, the elders called it a curse, and my name became its offering. They didn't say it aloud at first. They spoke around it. They spoke about debt. They spoke about balance. They spoke about how someone always had to pay when the realm grew hungry. Then the wind died at the ridge, and the ravens stopped calling. That's when they came for me. My hands shook when the cold metal of the chain touched my wrist. Not because I'd never been restrained, because I knew what restraint meant here. It meant my hands would be used for work until my strength was gone. It meant my body would be weighed like firewood. It meant someone else would pretend it was necessary. They led me through lanes, powdered with frost. Every step cracked the ice on the packed earth. The smell of smoke from chimneys clung to the air, mixing with the sharp scent of animal fat and wet wool. People watched from behind cloth and fear. I could feel the betrayal in the way they avoided my eyes. Even my mother, she stood behind the grain sacks, her lips pressed so tight they turned pale, like she could sew silence into me. She never reached for my hand. She never said my name, like it mattered. Only my younger brother, Oren, surged forward once, but the elder's guard shoved him back. Oren's face went red, with the effort of holding back tears. His hands flexed, as if he wanted to grab something that wasn't there. A rope, a miracle. I wanted to tell him to run. I wanted to tell him that the king's border isn't only walls and wolves, it's a promise, and promises can be broken. But the guards marched me anyway, boots crunching, breath steaming, each exhale a little cloud that vanished before it could become hope. At the ridge, the realm looked like a frozen animal spines of black pines stretching into a white sky. Beyond the hills, the northern realm of the Alpha King lay hidden under snow and silence. His isolation was famous in the way storms are famous, not because they are known, but because they are inevitable. We've reached the outpost, where smoke didn't rise, where torches burned with a blue flame, as if the air itself refused fire. The village elder handed a sealed offering scroll to a man who looked like he'd been carved from ice. He wore a healer's coat, but his hands were too still to be kind. He didn't step into the cold. The cold seemed to step around him, Edrin Frostwood. I knew his name the way people know the name of sickness. His eyes slid over me, quick and assessing, as if I were an item he'd almost bought. He smiled, thin, polite, and then he bowed toward the outpost's dark stone gate. "Seraphina Voss," he said, as if tasting it. I learned then that I wasn't being sent as a person, I was being sent as a solution. A slow voice carried from somewhere behind the gate, deep enough that it seemed to vibrate in my teeth. "A blood offering to keep the realm sealed," the voice said. Edrin's tone changed, warming like broth, "for the king's safety, for the North's survival." I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry. "I'm not sick," I whispered. It wasn't bravery. It was desperation, disguised as a fact. Edrin tilted his head. "No, my dear. You're useful." My wrists burned from the cold and the chain, and yet something else burned too. Something beneath my skin that I'd felt once, long ago, when I touched a frostbitten field and the snow had melted around my fingers like it recognized me. Back then, I hadn't known what it meant. I'd only thought I'd imagined it. Now, as Edrin looked at me like he knew the answer, the feeling stirred again, not warmth power. A quiet hum that vibrated under my ribs. The gate opened. Not with a creak, not with a groan. It opened like it had been waiting for my arrival. The first thing I saw was snow. Everywhere snow, but it wasn't blank. It had texture crystal patterns, wind-polished ridges, faint blue glimmers, as if the moon had left glitter in the ground. The air smelled of pine sap and old stone. A faint metallic tang threaded through it, like iron dust. Then I heard them. Not the guards, not the echo of footsteps, the wolves. They moved around the outer yard in silent arcs. When they shifted, their fur didn't crunch the snow, it slid over it. Their eyes caught torchlight bright points that looked too intelligent. A pack, gathered not for play, but for vigilance. My breath came faster, my fear sharpened, until it was almost clean. I was dragged forward past a line of carved stakes wrapped in leather. Symbols were burned into the wood spirals, and teeth and circles that felt like they belonged to something older than language. A figure stood at the top of a stair, tall, cloaked in dark fur and layered winter cloth, so heavy it looked like it could stop. Arrow's silver hair fell in thick ropes. When he turned slightly, the torchlight fractured across his brow scar and made it look like a slash of lightning. The Alpha King. He didn't step down right away. He didn't need to. The pack pressed forward enough to show that he held the yard without moving. I couldn't see his expression clearly from where I stood, but his silence had weight. It pressed against my chest. Edrin spoke again, voice smooth as if rehearsed. King Cale Dravenor village has complied. She will serve as winter blood to keep the frost from swallowing our fields. I flinched at the way he said serve. The Alpha King's gaze slid to me. For a moment, the air felt colder, not because the weather changed, but because attention is its own kind of weather. The pack watched too. One wolf moved closer, white with shadow grey patches, eyes like polished amber. It stopped at a careful distance, lowering its head slightly, as if testing whether I was prey. I didn't move to offer myself. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I stared back. The chain on my wrists creaked as my hands flexed, and I felt that hidden hum rise. A memory flashed, my fingertips on frost, the way the snow had softened when my body recognized something inside it. This time, the hum grew stronger. The white wolf's nostrils flared, its gaze sharpened. It took one slow step, then another, still not touching me. The Alpha King lifted his hand. The pack froze. His command didn't need words. The wolves obeyed as if he had woven them into the snow itself. "Bring her inside," he said. Edrin blinked, surprised. "As you wish, sire." "To see what she is," the Alpha King added. My stomach flipped. Not because I felt safe, because I understood the danger of being investigated by someone who held power like a weapon. The guards tried to pull me toward the hall. The white wolf cut in front of them. Not aggressive, simply refusing. It looked at the men like they were obstacles, then looked back at me, eyes steady. One guard muttered something and yanked the chain again. The wolf snarled, not loud, but deep, the sound vibrating under my ribs. The men backed away, tapped. It was the first time in days something had refused for me. As I was marched through the outer yard, the cold air filled my lungs, and the hum beneath my skin stretched as if it recognized the king's presence. The corridor beyond the gate was lit by hanging lanterns that burned with a gentle amber flame. Their light turned the stone walls warm gold, revealing carvings of wolves and storms. My footsteps echoed. My breath sounded too loud. Then I saw the hall. The walls weren't only stone. They were layered with iron bands and dark wood, reinforced like a fortress. Fur rugs covered the floor like thick skins over bones. The smell hit me next. Smoke, cold, leather, and something sharp, like winter herbs crushed between palms. The Alpha King's throne sat at the far end, carved from dark wood and bone-colored inlays. It wasn't gaudy. It looked inevitable, like it belonged there even before humans built anything. When I was brought before him, the guards lowered my chain, just enough for the link to rest against the stone floor. The king didn't approach. He gestured toward a small table near the hearth. "Sit." The word had no softness, but it wasn't a demand for harm. It was an order for steadiness. I didn't sit right away, not out of defiance, out of calculation. If I moved wrong, they might interpret it as compliance for the ritual. I watched the Alpha King's wolves instead. They weren't surrounding me in hostility. They were flanking with purpose, keeping space between me and the guards. Their eyes never fully left my face. The pack, my first threat that didn't become a trap. Finally, I sat on the edge of the fur-covered bench. The warmth wasn't pleasant. It was too hot, too fast, as if the hearth had been fed for me. The Alpha King leaned forward slightly, and I realized his stillness wasn't distance. It was control. "Edrin Frostwood," he said. Edrin stepped closer, his boots not crunching the floor. He moved, like someone familiar with this place's rules. "She's the offering. The village says she's the cause of their failing fields." My hands clenched. I didn't. Edrin's gaze snapped to me, quick and warning. "Don't speak." "Not yet." My tongue stuck. Betrayal tightened around my throat. It wasn't only the village. It was Edrin too, someone who had smiled at my chain like it was a key. The Alpha King's eyes held mine. He didn't interrupt Edrin with emotion. He interrupted with silence. Then his beast moved. It wasn't a jump. It wasn't magic fireworks. It was the wolves. How? They shifted their weight in unison. How their fur along the spine rose like a storm about to break. My skin prickled. That hidden hum surged, answering something. I felt it in my bones. A vibration that didn't belong to fear. It belonged to recognition. The Alpha King's hand rose again, slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Stand," he ordered. I rose. Edrin reached for my wrist. The white wolf moved closer, head low. His expression didn't change, but the paws had teeth. He withdrew his hand. The Alpha King's gaze didn't waver. "Touch her," he instructed the healers behind Edrin. They approached with tools, metal hooks, small glass vials, cloth wraps. Their hands were practiced, but their eyes were uncertain. When they saw the wolves watching, they applied a cloth to my collarbone, where my scar lived. Cold spread through the area. Then heat. Then a flash of sensation that almost made me gasp. A faint shimmer ran along my skin, like frost melting into water. It didn't burn. It didn't soothe. It awakened. One healer sucked in a breath. "It's..." Edrin cut in fast. "It's residue from frost sickness. She was exposed. That's why." The Alpha King lifted his hand, halting him. His wolves bristled again. I realized then that I wasn't just being tested. I was being measured against something the King's pack could sense. A predator knows what prey means, but pack instincts sense more than hunger. They sense truth. The Alpha King stepped down from the dais at last. His boots hit the stone with a quiet finality. When he moved, the air adjusted around him, like the hall had been waiting for his shape. He stopped a few paces from me. I expected threat. I expected violence. Instead, I felt his beast become still enough to listen. He looked at my wrists, at the chain link resting on the stone, and something in the wolves tightened like a leash preparing to snap. "Who gave you that chain?" he asked. The guards shifted. Edrin's jaw tightened by a fraction. "I merely arranged the transport. Who holds the promise?" the Alpha King repeated, voice low. "Holds the guilt." The guards didn't answer. Edrin's eyes flicked to me, then away. He had rehearsed the story, but now the story was being forced to stand on unstable ground. I swallowed hard. It was. The Alpha King's gaze cut to me. "Don't." I stopped. His command wasn't cruel. It was protective, the kind that keeps a person from falling into a trap while surrounded by wolves. He turned toward the guards. "Remove the chain." My heart lurched. The guards hesitated. The white wolf took one step closer, and the hesitation vanished like mist. The chain was lifted. The metal felt heavier when it wasn't biting my wrists. Without it, my skin tingled like it had been held underwater too long. Edrin looked at the king, as if betrayed by a decision he hadn't expected. "Sire," the village asked. "The village sent a sacrifice," the Alpha King said, each word placed carefully, "not a person to be owned." Then he turned back to me. My mouth went dry again. Because the question wasn't about my village's lie, it was about what I was underneath it. I remembered the frost melt at my fingertips. I remembered the hum, the way it answered the cold instead of resisting it. I don't know, I said, and the honesty tasted like blood. The Alpha King's beast reacted just a subtle change in the wolf's eyes. Like he didn't accept the answer, but he accepted my agency. He gestured toward a side corridor. You will stay here until the truth is pulled from Edrin Frostwood's mouth. Edrin's lips parted. King Cale Draven, you can't. The wolves moved. Not toward him, like attackers. Toward him, like barriers. He swallowed his protest. I followed the king's motion with my gaze, and the corridor beyond the hall opened into a chamber, warmed by a low hearth and lined with furs. A basin sat near the window. Water steamed faintly, and the smell of herb sage wintergreen drifted through the air. Food sat on a small table. Thick bread, a bowl of broth with pale chunks of root, and a cup of dark tea that smelled like berries and smoke. Everything about it was normal. That's what scared me. Because nothing normal happens to women who are sent as sacrifice. The Alpha King didn't enter the room right away. He stood in the doorway, the line of his body blocking the cold that lingered outside. You eat, he ordered. Not, you will be punished. Not, you must prove yourself. Just, eat. I stared at the bread. My stomach growled, humiliating and sharp. I don't trust you, I said, but my voice didn't carry the strength I wanted. The pack's silence thickened. The king's shadow stretched into the room, and the heat from his presence made the fur under my fingertips feel alive. Good, he said. Trust is earned, but you will not starve because others decided to throw you away. My throat tightened. I looked away before he could see it. I sat at the table. My hands trembled as I broke the bread. Steam rose into my face, warm and earthy. I ate anyway, because my body remembered how hunger feels, and I refused to let fear control my muscles. When I swallowed, the broth slid down my throat like a thawing river. It carried herbs that eased the tightness in my chest. It didn't fix me. It didn't heal everything, but it made living possible. The hours moved like heavy cloth. I didn't know if it was day or night because the windows were covered with thick frost glass, and the hearth fire never stopped glowing. I heard movement outside, the rustle of fur, distant howls, the soft scrape of claws against stone. The wolves were restless, but not for aggression. They were gathering information. I lay on a fur blanket that smelled like cedar and smoke. My eyes burned from exhaustion and cold trauma. I tried to sleep, but every time I started to drift, I saw the chain on my wrists and the elder's face and Oren's hands trembling in the crowd. Betrayal is a taste. It sits on your tongue, long after the words are gone. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of snow-swallowing rooftops, and in the dream, my voice turned into ice. I woke with a gasp. A knock sounded at the door, not loud, controlled. The king entered without asking. He carried something covered in cloth. An iron bowl, I realized, when the scent of hot water rose. He set it down carefully, as if he was dealing with an injured creature. My pulse kicked. Why are you doing this? I demanded before I could stop myself. My voice echoed in the room. I hated how sharp it sounded. I hated that I had asked him something that could be answered with cruelty. The Alpha King didn't step closer. He only watched me, and the wolves outside the room quieted, as if even they knew this was a question that mattered. Because, he said, the wolves refuse to treat you like prey. I stared at him. Wolves aren't people. No, he said, and his tone lowered, as if he could feel the line between us. But their senses are honest. My breath caught. He lifted the cloth from the bowl. Inside was water that steamed around slices of pale root and dried petals. It smelled like clean healing, like a winter forest after sunrise. Wash, he ordered. I should have refused. I should have demanded to leave, to find my village, to beg Idrin and the elders for explanations. But my wrists were still bruised, my hair had crusted with frost, and my skin felt like it belonged to someone else. I realized then that agency isn't only refusing, agency is choosing what kind of survival you build. I stood. The king's gaze stayed fixed on my face, not my body. The wolves watched him, not me, like they were making sure he didn't shift. I washed my hands and face slowly, careful with my bruises. Warm water soaked the old cold away. It stung less than I expected. When I looked at myself in the basin's surface, my eyes were still mine. My gaze was still stubborn. But I looked less broken. When I dried off, I noticed something strange on my collarbone, where my scar curved. A faint mark, like frost veins, had appeared under my skin. It wasn't an injury. It was a pattern. A sigil, almost. I touched it lightly, and the hum answered, stronger now, like it had been waiting to wake fully. The Alpha King's eyes sharpened. He didn't move toward me fast. He moved with restraint. "Show me," he said. I swallowed and stepped closer to him because my power had been awakened in a way I didn't understand. Curiosity is a form of bravery. I lifted my collar. The mark glimmered faintly. The room's hearthlight caught it and turned it from frost into something else. Silver lines that looked almost like writing in a language older than the village. The Alpha King exhaled once. It wasn't relief. It was recognition. "Idrin Frostwood," he called from the doorway. Idrin arrived quickly, as if he had been listening outside. That angered me more than his earlier betrayal. He hadn't expected the king to keep me alive. He stared at the mark on my collarbone. His face tightened. "You did this?" he asked me. I shook my head. "I didn't know." Idrin's gaze flicked to the king. "It's a threat, a curse. She's dangerous." The Alpha King stepped back half a pace, and the wolves surged forward, bristling. Idrin went still. The pack's hostility didn't belong to me. It belonged to Idrin's lie. For the first time, I understood that my survival here wasn't only the king's choice. It was the pack's agreement that I didn't fit the story Idrin sold. "What is she?" Idrin demanded, voice sharper. I stared at him. "What am I to you?" He hesitated. The delay was an admission. The Alpha King's voice cut in again, calm and deadly. "You said she was winter blood." Idrin lifted his chin. "She was needed. The realm is hungry because of what you did," Kale Draven said. Hearing his full title spoken in the room made the air thicken. I expected denial. Instead, Idrin's expression shifted into something colder, calculating, afraid. He stepped closer, gaze locked on the sigil on my skin. "She's the key," he whispered. "They said it would kill her." My stomach dropped. "They?" I asked. Idrin's mouth tightened. "Old lines, seers. The sort of people who hide behind prayers." The Alpha King's beast surged again, and the wolves' shadows stretched along the floor like ink. I felt my power respond like a blade waking from a sheath. "Tell me," I demanded, voice shaking but not breaking. "What did you do?" Idrin's gaze flicked to mine. "I saved the village once. I thought I was saving them again. Save them." The words were too neat, too practiced. "By sending me?" I asked. Idrin's jaw clenched. "By using what they needed you to become." The anger in me rose, not as a fight meant for the room, but as a clarity that made my fear less useful. I looked at the king's wolves. They watched me like they expected me to decide what I was going to do with the truth. I touched my sigil again. The hum became a pulse. Warm silver light bled beneath my skin and then faded, leaving a faint chill behind. Like the last breath of winter, the Alpha King's gaze softened in a way I could not name, but could sense. He didn't say emotions. He showed it through the pack, through the wolves stepping closer to my bench, instead of circling me like a target. "Enough," he said. "You will answer my questions." Idrin didn't argue. He looked away, and I realized he had already been cornered by something older than him, a promise his lie could not outrun. The Alpha King questioned him for hours. I listened from a chair near the hearth, my bruised hands wrapped around a mug of tea that tasted like smoke and sweetness. Every time Edrin tried to twist the story, the wolves made small sounds, low, warning growls that cut the lies short. When the truth finally surfaced, it came like ice breaking underfoot. The village had not been chosen because I was cursed. I was chosen because I carried a dormant seal in my blood, the kind that could lock winter's hunger away from the realm. The seers had said the seal would only activate if a sacrificial bearer was brought to the Alpha King's border during a particular frost cycle. Edrin had been the one to interpret prophecy. He had convinced the elders that sacrificing me would protect them. He had convinced them because he wanted to keep his own status, to remain the only healer who could fix curses. He had convinced himself too. That was what broke me most. The realization that someone could do evil with a story that sounded like salvation. When the king's wolves stopped Edrin from leaving, Edrin's face went pale. "Even if you believe her," he said to the Alpha King, "the seal will harm her. It will tear her apart." The Alpha King's silence was so heavy it felt like a wall. I waited for him to order my punishment. Instead, he turned to me, and his beast, his pack, leaned in with him as if the entire realm had decided I was not expendable. "What will it do?" I asked, voice raw. Edrin swallowed. "It will pull the winter out of you. It will unmake what you are, and then it will remake you into a vessel, not a person." My hands curled into fists. I could feel my hum again, stronger, as if my power resented being named a tool. "I won't be a thing," I said. The Alpha King's gaze held me steady. "Then you won't." How could he promise that? I didn't understand him. Not yet. I only understood that, in his world, the wolves were already choosing me. He ordered Edrin locked away in a dungeon beneath the keep. Chains clinked. Echoes travelled through stone halls. I heard Edrin's protests fade, swallowed by distance and cold air. When the room was finally quiet, the king stood over me. "You will stay here," he said. I didn't relax. My spine stayed tense. "You won't let me go back." He watched me for a long moment. The wolves behind him shifted, and I realized they weren't guarding only him. They were guarding me from the village's lie, from the temptation to run back toward betrayal and punish myself with hope. "The village already threw you," the king said. "If you return, they will throw you again." I swallowed. "And you think your walls make it better?" The king's beast moved. One wolf stepped forward, placing its head near my shoulder, but not touching. The warmth of fur pressed against my awareness like a vow. No words, only presence. "Yes," he said finally. "For now." Slow burn, I realized, not in how he touched me, in how he respected the way I still had to choose myself. Over the next days I did ordinary things because ordinary things can be armor. I learned the keep by touch, how the floors warmed near the hearth, how the hallways grew colder, the deeper they went, how the library's air smelled of dust and pressed herbs. I swept snow from thresholds. I carried water in a bucket whose handle bit my palms. I kneaded bread dough until my arms ached and my mind stopped spiraling. The king watched from a distance, not constantly, not in a way that felt like stalking, more like the pack's attention when they needed to know I was alive. Sometimes he stood beside a window and watched the storm gather. Sometimes the wolves brought me small gifts, a rabbit with clean fur, a bundle of herbs, a strip of leather the color of old amber. Each gift felt like communication. They were telling me what the king refused to say aloud. He noticed. He valued. He wouldn't break me. When the frost cycle neared its peak, the hum under my skin became constant. It was like a second heartbeat. It pulsed at dawn, and at midnight it flared when the wind screamed against the walls. I woke one morning with silver lines crawling across my collarbone like frost writing itself into my flesh. I stumbled into the bathing chamber, hand shaking, trying to wash it away like it was dirt, but the lines didn't fade. They spread. I pressed a palm to my chest and felt something tug at the shape of my ribs, as if my body was becoming a door. Panic surged. I was not passive. I tried to act. I grabbed cloth and bandages. I found warm oils. I wrapped my chest tight enough to steady my breathing. I paced until my feet hurt. The king appeared in the doorway without being announced. He didn't tell me to stop panicking. He stepped closer to the hearth, lifted a bowl of ice water, and set it beside me with deliberate care. "Breathe," he said. I glared at him. I can't hold the seal for you," he cut in. "But I can keep the wolves from tearing this keep apart while you learn how to live with it." My anger faltered, because I hadn't realized the wolves were reacting to the hum too. Their fur along their shoulders was raised, their eyes were storm bright, they were afraid of the transformation happening inside me. I sat down hard. "Show me," I whispered. The king's gaze sharpened. "Show you what?" "How to be the bearer without becoming a vessel," I said. He studied me like I was a problem he couldn't solve with brute force. Then he nodded once. That nod changed the air. It felt like trust offered. He summoned the pack to the courtyard. We didn't speak in grand speeches. We moved through practical steps. He had the wolves circle the stone ring outside the keep. He placed iron bowls around the perimeter, each filled with herbs and water, each carved with the same spirals and teeth I'd seen on the outpost stakes. The realm's old symbols were everywhere. But now I understood. They weren't only decoration. They were instructions. The seal in my blood responded to the symbols, like a key searching for locks. I stood in the center. My hum became a roar. Snow began to fall inside the ring without clouds. It swirled upward, forming a thin veil around my shoulders. The cold wasn't normal winter cold. It felt like a deep ocean, like freezing water pulled by gravity. My breath came in sharp bursts. I wanted to step out, but the wolves held their positions, not because they were trapping me, because they were anchoring me to the ring, like posts keeping a tent standing. The king stepped to the edge. He didn't touch me. He watched, and in the way he watched, I felt his restraint, his refusal to take from me what I didn't choose. I spoke the only words I had, truths from my own memory. "I'm not your sacrifice," I said. The silver lines on my skin flared. The snow veil thickened. Then I added, voice steadier, "I choose what I become." The hum shifted, less like a tearing and more like a tuning fork finding the right note. A crack sound traveled through the air, like ice splitting in deep water. The ring's iron bowls vibrated, tiny droplets freezing midair. The seal was activating, but it wasn't unmaking me the way Edrin said. It was translating me. The winter hunger, pressing at the realm's edge, something I couldn't see, pulled at my seal like a tide tugging a rope. For a moment, I felt myself pulled too, a dizziness so strong I thought I'd collapse. Then the wolves howled. Not mournful, not frantic, a coordinated sound, low and steady, like drums in a war tent. The king's beast joined it, and the sound traveled through my bones. It reminded my body. It was alive. The seal tightened, the pull eased. A surge of power flowed through me, not distraction, but control. My skin cooled to a calm silver. My breath slowed. I staggered forward and pressed both palms against the stone beneath me. The snow veil collapsed inward like a curtain falling. For a heartbeat, silence filled the courtyard so completely that even the wind seemed to pause. Then the iron bowls stopped vibrating. The ring was still. The seal had done something. It had locked winter's hunger away, not by killing me, by making me the lock. I stood shaking, not from weakness, but from the truth of what I had survived. The wolves circled closer. Their eyes softened, and the king's stance loosened a fraction. He stepped into the ring and finally reached toward me. He didn't grab, he offered his hand. I looked at it. A choice sat between us like a bridge made of ice. If I took his hand, it meant accepting a world where I wasn't disposable. If I refused, it meant I had to keep carrying the seal alone. I lifted my own hand. My fingers brushed his palm. The hum quieted instantly, like a storm settling into sleep. Warmth spread through my hand. Not heat from him, heat from me, from within. My eyes stung. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stood tall, and the seal's silver lines dimmed into a faint pattern beneath my skin, like frost, trapped under glass. The Alpha King's wolves pressed close around us, forming a protective barrier that didn't choke. Then came the shocking twist. As the village's sacrifice cycle was broken, messengers arrived from the North Road. They brought news that made the keep's guards drop their spears. The village blamed me. They claimed I had failed the ritual, on purpose. They said Edrin had vanished because the curse took him. And they demanded the king return me for punishment, send another offering. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. His pack grew quieter and sharper, eyes glinting as if already calculating routes across snow. I watched him from where I stood, with the seal fading under my collarbone. I realized the next danger wasn't the wolves. It was the lie, trying to hunt its way back into my life. The king called a council in the throne room the following night, but he didn't invite the village. He invited truth. He brought Edrin Frostwood up from the dungeon. The healer's wrists were bruised, his hair tangled, his calm gone. He walked like a man expecting the world to forgive him. He looked at me with hatred that wasn't passionate. It was wounded control. "You succeeded," he said, voice quiet. "Of course you did. They always pick the wrong pieces." I stepped forward, not to fight him, but to answer him. "You picked me," I said. "The village didn't drag me here because they knew me. They dragged me because you told them I was the easiest answer." Edrin's mouth twisted. "Easiest answer keeps everyone else alive. And you," I replied, "called that mercy." The Alpha King's beast shifted, wolves pressing close as if ready to silence Edrin with their presence. The king's voice was low. "Why did you lie?" Adrian's eyes flicked to mine. "I wasn't lying," he said. "I was using the only language the realm understands, blood and fear." He smiled like he expected admiration. The king didn't give it. Instead, he gestured to a runner who brought a sealed ledger, sealed in iron and wax. The king cracked it open. He had documents, not prophecy, contracts. Edrin had written to the village elders months ago, promising that sending me would elevate him, keep him in favor with seers and with the king's outer council. The ink on the letters was stained with a residue that smelled like medicinal herbs and blood. I recognized the pattern of his handwriting because he had helped my mother once, during a fever, when my brother had almost died. That memory hit me like a blow. He had saved us once. Then he had used that debt like rope around my throat. I stared at the king's ledger until my vision blurred. The betrayal was no longer only emotional, it was structural. It was betrayal as design. Adrin tried to speak again, but the wolves stepped closer. The king didn't order execution. He ordered exile from the realm. "Your hands no longer belong to healing," he said. "They belong to consequence." Edrin's face twisted. "You can't." "I can," the king replied, and the pack obeyed. The wolves escorted Edrin out of the keep. Chains echoed down hallways. The sound faded into the night. After that, everything changed. The king stopped treating me like a problem to solve. He treated me like a partner in surviving what the prophecy claimed. He started to include me in small decisions, where the herb stores would be placed, how the hearth would be fed before storms, which corridor was safer when snowstorms hit. I asked questions. He answered sparingly, but his answers had weight. He didn't tell me he needed me. His pack did that in their movements, how they adjusted their positions when I walked, how they watched the door when I slept. One evening the storm returned with claws. The wind screamed around the keep, pushing snow against the windows, until the light outside vanished. I felt the seal hum again, stronger, responding to the realm's hunger trying to escape its lock. I found the king in the courtyard, cloak damp with melt and snow. He looked carved from winter, but his stillness wasn't distant now. It was weary. I didn't pity him. I didn't soften him with words. I did what I knew how to do. I gathered herbs, crushed them between my palms and brewed tea. I carried it to him and placed it within his reach. He glanced at the cup like he didn't know what to do with kindness. Then he lifted it and drank. The wolves exhaled slowly. Not relief from danger. Relief that something familiar had returned. I sat near him on a stone step. The cold soaked through my dress, but the warmth of my own power helped steady me. Will it always hum? I asked. The king's gaze stayed on the storm clouds. As long as the winter hunger keeps remembering it was locked, so we'll keep it locked, I said. He didn't correct me. He didn't take credit. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was charged, full of things neither of us had permission to say too soon. When the storm finally eased, the courtyard lights flickered. The wolves returned to their positions, making sure the perimeter was safe. I felt my seals settle. The hum quieted into a gentle pulse. My eyes drifted to the king's silver hair, damp at the edges, and I realized something that terrified me. I wanted him, not as a rescue fantasy, as a choice, as a bond that could survive betrayal and still be real, but I didn't say it. Instead, I stood and walked to him, slow enough for him to see it was my agency, not fear. I rested my palm against his chest, where his winter cloth hid his heart. He inhaled. The wolves shifted, but they didn't interrupt. The king didn't speak for a long moment. Then he lowered his hand over mine and held it carefully, like he was learning the shape of trust. Adrian tried to use you, he said at last. My jaw tightened, and the village let him. The king's beast stirred in the wolf's shoulders, anger restrained by discipline. He looked down at my hand, then up at my face. They will learn what a sacrifice is when it refuses to be one. I swallowed. Will you take me in? I asked, voice steadier than I felt. Not as a token. Not as a lock. As me. The king's silence stretched, and I thought I'd pushed too far. Then his fingers tightened, subtle, grounding. And the wolves exhaled in unison, as if the pack itself approved. Yes, he said, not a grand declaration. A vow made of restraint, a vow that made room for healing instead of demanding immediate devotion. Over the next days, we prepared for the final part of destiny. The king's outer border had wards that needed maintenance, old runes cracked by time and by the winter hunger's attempts to return. He brought me to the ward stones, not to expose me to danger, to share his responsibility. I worked beside him. I cleaned rune grooves with warm water and cloth until the stone gleamed. I traced the spirals with oil and herbs until the symbols looked newly born. I hummed softly while I worked, not because I was trying to enchant him, but because my power responded to rhythm. The snow around the stones softened under my hum, melting into thin rivulets that never touched the ground. Like the realm itself listened, the Alpha King watched. His pack watched too. When I faltered from exhaustion, he didn't take my brush from my hand. He simply shifted closer and offered something better, his presence as a shelter. The walls inside him came down slowly, visible in how often he let me be close without turning into distance. He began to let me find his beast's favorite places, behind the wolf's ears, where fur warmed beneath my fingertips. He began to let me sit in the throne room while he paced, offering me bread instead of keeping me behind doors. Then, on the night the last ward symbol woke, the sky split with aurora lights, green and violet ribbons crawling across the frozen heavens. The seal in my blood answered, not with pain, with peace. The hum rose into a song, and my voice, involuntary, joined it, low and steady. The wolves howled along with me, their sound harmonizing with mine, like the realm was recognizing a rightful lock. The king stepped beside me. This time, he didn't hide behind his throne. He didn't stand as distant predator. He placed his hand over my heart again, and I felt the seal settle into a gentler rhythm. He leaned closer, and his breath warmed my forehead. The words he finally spoke weren't for the court, they were for the truth between us. My realm will not sacrifice you, he said. It will choose you, again and again. I didn't tear up, I didn't break. I lifted my chin. I turned to him fully, and when his wolves stepped forward, their bodies forming a protective crescent around us, I felt a new kind of belonging bloom, earned through ordinary acts, forged through betrayal's aftermath, sealed by power that finally belonged to me. In that aurora-lit night, I took his offered hand and walked with him toward the throne room, not as an offering, not as a prisoner, as the chosen bearer of winter's lock, as the woman the Alpha King refused to sacrifice, and as the bond destiny couldn't undo.